Hi everyone, my name is Jacob Larson, and my presentation and paper is on the evolution of antibiotic resistance. And I'm going to be kind of talking about how we got to the point that we are at with antibiotics and the problems there. This is kind of a controversial topic that I found out from the start in researching the different articles and is this really a problem and what's really causing this problem? So hopefully in my research and things, I'll be able to help you more understand what I found. Just to give you a little background, antibiotics have been used to help treat bacterial infections for about 80 years now, all the way from the start, Alexander Fleming, who actually created penicillin. So antibiotics help our immune systems battle advanced infections. So usually our immune system can take over and take care of these infections, but at times when they're more serious is when we need to have these antibiotics to really help us. Antibiotics do not help viral infections. So the problem is distinguishing between the two. So sometimes we don't know if it's bacterial or viral, and we have to do further tests to see whether it is or not, and if antibiotics will actually help us. So resistance actually started when antibiotics were created. So all the way back from penicillin, when that was created is when resistance started. So I'm going to be talking more about this and how antibiotics have evolved over the years and really just how we got to where we are now. Resistance is when something is overused or used inappropriately. Bacteria becomes resistant over time. It's not necessarily just a quick thing that happens right away. It usually takes time. Actually, a statistic is that 23,000 deaths every year in the U.S. are caused by antibiotic resistance. So it is a serious problem that we need to look at further. Like I said, it started from the beginning, all the way from the first antibiotic, which was penicillin. The way that this happens is that one bacteria or a couple will survive an antibiotic, which will multiply within our bodies and cause the sickness to flare up even more and cause it to be even more serious. So that's how it all starts, is the bacteria doesn't get killed completely within us. This causes them to really get more comfortable inside of our bodies and multiply. A big problem is the cost. We might just say, well, why don't we just create more antibiotics? Well, it's actually really expensive. They say that research and development for just one antibiotic from discovery to approval is estimated to cost about 0.8 to 1.7 billion dollars. And another big problem is that investors don't really want to invest their money in these antibiotics because antibiotics are used to just treat short-term illnesses usually, compared to long-term illnesses and health problems like, say, cancer. People are a lot more willing to invest their money in those because, they say it's going to help more people and it's going to help more people long term. So they actually want to invest their money in something that is even more serious to our health. This graph actually shows when antibiotics were introduced. So as you can see, there were several introduced in the beginning, but from 1962 all the way to 2000, no major classes of antibiotics were introduced. So that's a big problem right there, is that from the start, as with this whole evolutionary process and things, a lot were brought about, but more recently, very few have. One example of kind of the evolution of antibiotic resistance is MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And this was actually able to be treated fairly well. The problem is, it's from 1975 to 1991, the presence of MRSA in the United States hospitals has actually increased from 2.4% to 29%. So it has increased by a lot. It initially started treating penicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus until it actually started becoming resistant to that. So then we had to use this methicillin, which then became resistant to it. So the problem is MRSA is just becoming such a huge problem that there aren't very many antibiotics that are actually treating it. And so what I'm actually going to talk about is vancomycin, which is an antibiotic that's been used to treat MRSA for the last like 5 decades. The problem is we've been relying on it so heavily. So a lot of people would say, well, if it's working, right, so it's fine. If something isn't broken, don't fix it. Well, the problem with thinking that is we've been using it for so many years, so we've been relying on it, so resistance to it is actually starting now. So recent lab studies have actually shown that it's losing its potency against MRSA. One study was shown that, well, what if we gave more of it, increase the dosages of it? It actually had no impact, no change, and actually later studies showed that that's more harmful to give more of it to patients. One important thing that all of us need to do is read the directions and take the proper dosages of antibiotics. We need to follow the doctor's orders and take all the antibiotics if they prescribe it to us. This is another one of those controversial topics because a lot of people don't think that this is a problem. That a lot of people think that when they start feeling better, if they're not done with their antibiotics, they can just stop taking them because they say, oh, I feel a lot better. I don't need to take the medicine anymore. Well, the problem with this is that if all the bacteria aren't killed within our body, the bad bacteria, then when we stop taking the medicine, they actually become resistant to those medicines and become stronger and can multiply. And then you can actually get that sickness again. It can flare up again. So we need to wipe out the surviving majority. So, back in the day when this all started, this wasn't a problem. But now that we're seeing that it's a problem, people think that they need to stop taking it as early on as they can because they'll become resistant, when actually it's the opposite and it's hurting us more. So that evolution is becoming prevalent, that we need to really take the whole dosage. One problem is that doctors are actually prescribing antibiotics for viral infections. They say, well, it could be viral, it could be bacterial, let's just prescribe it just in case. I actually see this a lot. I work in a doctor's office and I've seen this happen many times where doctors will prescribe it just for the patients, kind of for ease of mind and for them to be comfortable, just in case, which isn't a good thing. And really, it's not going to do any good if it's a viral infection. And doctors actually admit that it's easier to prescribe antibiotics for patients that already expect to get the antibiotics when they walk into the doctor's office. Another study that was done with doctors, they studied all these different patients that went in for a sore throat to the doctor's offices, and then they interviewed all these patients and asked them kind of what they were expecting from the treatment and what they know about antibiotics and bacterial infections and viral infections. And they were also asked if they expected to receive antibiotics of any kind. And they actually then interviewed all the doctors and found out that a lot of the doctors just didn't want to damage any relationships with their patients, especially if they'd already had expectations for receiving antibiotics. So they didn't want to hurt their feelings and say, oh no, I don't want to give this to you, so they just did it anyway. So a lot of the doctors said that the patient's possible benefit from these drugs actually outweighed any theoretical community risk from bacterial resistance, which we're finding out is not true, that it's actually becoming harmful. So really, there's so many things that need to change. We need to increase educational materials and classes for all doctors, healthcare workers, laboratory staff, and the general public on appropriate use of antibiotics and the dangers that come from using them. A lot of people just aren't aware of this. They don't know. So we just need to make this more known, that over time, at the beginning, it wasn't as bad, but over the years, these antibiotics, as we have been taking them more and more and more, our bodies are just becoming more used to them. And so it's not killing out all the bacteria. So they're becoming stronger and more resistant within us. I gave you that example of MRSA. That's a perfect example of it, that it's becoming resistant to all these different antibiotics. That really right now, vancomycin is the only major antibiotic that's being used to treat it. Another thing that I found is it's time for the government and public institutes to become more aware and involved in the discovery of new antibiotic alternatives. And really, a lot of antibiotics today have come from soils and things. So if we research and study these underexplored ecological niches and deep sediments and marine niches, we might be able to find more possible strains of antibiotics. We might be able to use tax dollars for this, because obviously, like I said, that people don't want to invest money in this. So we really need to put, our tax dollars to work for these good things. Because obviously health benefits will definitely outweigh the cost. It is expensive, but it's going to help our health in the long run. Just kind of in conclusion, antibiotics have evolved since the beginning. MRSA is a perfect example that I gave you of this happening. Increased resistance over the last several years, plus underdevelopment of new antibiotics, is a problem. Like I showed you on that graph, there hasn't been very many newer antibiotics over the years. So this is going to cause a big, huge problem in the next 5, 10, 15 years, even more. So we all need to be responsible. Only take them when it's necessary and take them completely when it's needed, and really educate ourselves on these things, because bacteria are just becoming stronger, and we just can't keep taking the same ones. We need to come up with different ones so that our bodies can try new things and new antibiotics. These are my references that I use, so I hope you all enjoyed this presentation and hope you guys learned something about antibiotic resistance. Thank you.